find other great podcasts like this one at podmoth.network.
Hello, Boneheads. Future Sophie here. I have come to you from the recording editing studio to issue you a little bit of a warning for this episode. This episode is extremely graphic. And you say, Sophie, this is an episode about bones and death and crime. Why don't you give this warning every episode? And I probably should. But this episode has some extremely graphic content. So I just wanted to let everybody know that. This episode contains mentions of sexual assault and necrophilia. So please keep that in mind when listening to this episode. If that's not something that you feel like you are going to be comfortable with today, please join us next week for a different episode, and I hope you have a lovely week. Anyway, let's get into this episode. It's a fantastic one by Katelyn and the second part of our two-parter. So take it away, gals.
Do you want a new recording or just keep going through one big chunk?
Let's keep going through one big chunk.
One big chunk.
One big chunk. One big chunk. One big chunk is what I sometimes call Lewis when he steals Kuno's food.
A big chunk.
They were out of dog food this morning, so
the audacity.
I know! We were gonna try get tonight, last night, but Petco fucking closed at 7.
Oh, that's very early.
Nerds, yeah.
What about the working folks?
What about the working folks?
That don't work at Petco?
Yeah, apparently.
No, I'm sorry.
I don't know.
Get it online next time, I guess. Fuck you guys, then.
Yeah. I'll just feed my dogs rice and vegetables in the morning like a sophisticated dog mom that I am. Not like a scrubby dog mom who doesn't have dog food in the morning. I meant to make this gourmet little meal for my doggies. I didn't look in the fridge and say, what can you eat out of here?
Scrambled eggs are good.
Yeah. We didn't have any eggs, but they love scrambled eggs. Cheese is their favorite thing.
I bet. Oh, God. Yeah.
They go wild for cheese.
We always... Do you sing the song about the cheese tax to them?
Oh, God, yes. The cheese tax. The cheese tax.
You gotta pay the cheese tax
every time you're cooking. When the cheese comes out, this puppy starts looking.
It's so good.
Yes, it's very good. Puppy songs on TikTok. Cheese tax has been paid. You know what tax we gotta pay?
The bone tax?
Hell yeah.
Let's do it.
In olden days, a glimpse of femur was only for morbid dreamers, but you're not alone. Bring anything bones. Two goofy gals with deathly interest go on a skeleton inquest in your headphones. Anything bones.
Hello and welcome to Anything Bones. I'm Sophie, just listening Schwartz.
And I'm Katelyn, the Pacific Northwest worst nightmare, once again, heart. And you're listening to the podcast where we talk about terrible things.
Sad
Period.
bones, yeah.
We are coming back from an episode that has me reeling, to be honest.
Yeah, I almost kind of cried presenting it because it made me so sad. But it's the breaking news of the 200 plus people buried behind the Hines County penal farm in Mississippi. And if you're interested at all in that breaking story, that is what we talked about on last week's episode.
Yeah, and I heard the story and then I look at Sophie and I go, hey, we should do a two-parter probably, because I picked something that's also very gruesome and sad and horrible.
Yeah, Katelyn texted me earlier with her topic and was like, is this cool to do? And I was like, yeah, I'm doing that like penal farm thing. And she was like, oof.
Yeah, well, I was talking to Chris, my boyfriend, about what I was going to research for an upcoming episode. And he asked me if I had done this topic before. I realized I hadn't, and that I knew the name, but didn't know a ton of the details other than the big bullet points. So today, without further ado, we're going to talk about the Green River Killer.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah. Starting off, there's a huge trigger warning on this episode for sexual assault. The Green River Killer is just a hideous, loathsome sack of shit and did horrible things to his victim. So this episode's not going to be for everybody. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you for your time today. So my sources for this were a very... not very, but an old episode of Crime Junkie from May 28th, 2018. Biography.com, Britannica.com, and then NBC News.
Nice.
So, our story kind of begins, I'm going to take us to July 1982. The Green River Killer's first known victim is pulled from the Green River, which they say is in suburban Seattle. I would say it's south of Seattle. Wouldn't you say that?
I would agree with that.
Unfortunately, his victim is pulled from the river, and she has her clothes tied around her neck, and she would later be identified as 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield, Coffield, who was apparently a runaway. So this is July 1982. In about a month after this first body is found, they find 4 more bodies in and around the Green River. And so victim number 5, they're like, oh, something's going on. I guess we should form a task force. Yeah, it's definitely time.
Oh, after 5, it's time?
After 5 in 1 month, 31 days.
That is terrifying.
And unfortunately, he was preying upon vulnerable women and girls, mostly, who were often runaways or people that were forced or were working in sex work, and they would be kidnapped, and then their bodies would be found in remote parts of Seattle, Tacoma, and the Green River area, which is in between those two.
Oh, that's both of those places are our old stomping grounds.
Yes, Seattle and Tacoma. So one of the most notorious aspects of this whole story, and I'm just going to get it out of the way here, this is really disgusting. The Green River Killer did come back and revisit his victims at the crime scenes, where he would abuse their corpses until he couldn't anymore. And that's all I need to say about that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Katelyn.
Hideous, right? Isn't that... I mean, it's the worst. This guy is... yeah, this guy is really depraved.
Yeah, I got no words for that one. For that one,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I got nothing.
Yeah. Did you know that about this case?
I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We were talking about this before we recorded, and Katelyn was like, yeah, I didn't know too much about the Green River Killer. And I was like, yeah, me neither. It's with him, and also with Ted Bundy, I don't know, being in the same place where these things happened. And Katelyn and I used to walk around the University District, which was one of Ted Bundy's favorite hunting grounds.
Oh yeah, I lived there.
Yeah.
For 5 years.
Yeah. And it just gives me the chills to think about. And, it feels personal in a way, of these places, to think about these women and girls who were living lives very similar to ours in some ways, and in these places we know so well, and they were not safe.
Exactly. Yeah. So we were talking about timelines of wrongdoing in the last episode. So now there's some I don't think there's necessarily wrongdoing here, but there's just a series of unfortunate mistakes, or just, bad police work, possibly. I don't know if I want to go that far and say that, but long story short, he is active for almost 2 decades. From his first known victim in 1982, he is not going to be captured until 2001. We were young, we were children when he is caught.
That's so wild. I wonder if our parents remember that.
Possibly. Okay, so here we go. The first time that Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, because there's no spoiler alert, guys. Sorry, everybody knows that. He first comes to this task force attention in 1983.
Wow.
First victim is found in 82.
Okay.
18-year-old Marie Malver disappears after she is seen getting into a pickup truck with a man on Pacific Highway South. This is a well-trafficked area of like SeaTac, which is the area, like this town in between Seattle and Tacoma. Which
near the airport.
Yes, near the airport. It is a well-known, or it was a well-known area for sex work and picking people up. At the time. I don't know if it still is. So, a witness to her, Marie, getting into this truck, sees the truck in front of Gary Ridgway's house, tells police, "I think I found the truck in front of a house that Marie got into and was never seen again." Detectives interview him, and he's just like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know." And that's all there is to it. He is talked to so often over the years, it's kind of insane. There are multiple tips, run-ins with sex workers. He does voluntarily tell detectives that he's been arrested for solicitation before. He says that he, quote, continues to routinely pick up girls working the street and had even encountered 2 of the killer's presumed victims. But he denied having harmed them. Can you imagine the coincidence?
It's frustrating and it's saddening, but it's also like, from their perspective, like if they don't have hard evidence, I guess what can they do?
Hindsight is 2020, I will tell you. But it is astounding how often he is brought in over the years, and that he is a person of interest from the get.
Yeah,
and it
that's
takes
wild.
20 years of him killing so many women. While, it's just, it's astounding.
Yeah, it's deeply saddening.
In 1984, motherfucker takes a polygraph test. And he passes. And this is, I think I've said this before on the podcast, but I'll say it again. These tests are bullshit.
Yes.
Polygraphs are bullshit.
You should not believe a polygraph test.
Because they're measuring your response to things. So if you're calm, you can beat it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more complicated than that. But,
yes,
if you don't
still
have a stress response to the questions, you can look like you've passed it.
Yeah.
So that's 1980. Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
what I was just going to add to that is that they are also interpreted by people. And so there's a human element in there. And, we don't yet have a thing that can definitively tell if you're lying or not. So don't ever let anyone tell you that we do. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the end of that for a little while. In 1987, we're continuing to get tips from sex workers and God knows who else. And investigators are able to get a search warrant for his home, vehicles, and his work. So it's 1987.
All right.
They compare like hair, fibers, clothes, other evidence to crime scenes. And unfortunately, they can't definitively match anything to Gary Ridgway. It was this one. I'm not, they tried in this case.
Yeah.
Maybe it was too harsh before.
I mean,
they did not have the technology. So those fibers may have matched, or he was just careful. We don't know.
Yeah, that's the hard thing about crimes, before modern forensic science is they may have had the evidence, they just couldn't analyze it the way that they needed to.
So we're up to the early 90s. People are still dying all along the way. And this task force has disbanded by this point. But allegedly, there's a few detectives that are still working on the case. But it's the early 90s. And then our next development is 2001.
Wow.
When, DNA technology is much more sophisticated. And the crime lab is able to analyze smaller, more degraded samples. This prompts investigators to submit smaller samples for testing. And they also have, I guess they have a piece of gauze that Gary Ridgway had chewed on in 1987. Sure.
Okay.
Whatever.
Well, I don't care what it is. Yeah.
I don't care. Yeah. Somehow they have his DNA, and they are finally in 2001 able to match his DNA from his saliva to sperm found in 2 of the victims in 1982 and another victim from 1983. Hideous. Disgusting.
Yeah.
No.
But, this is why things like, forensic science are so amazing, and we can catch someone like this.
Yeah, it did take a while.
Yeah.
And so at this point, finally, he is arrested for aggravated murder of 5 victims, and he pleads not guilty, saying that he had dated them, but he hadn't killed them. And that was anybody that was linked to him by DNA. Don't worry.
God.
He's not going to weasel his way out of this one.
Okay.
But I have one more sad, unfortunate, hindsight is 2020 thing that has been recently brought to our attention by NBC News, actually. So NBC News did this investigative report, and they found that the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory had microscopic evidence on the clothing of his first victim and at least 7 others that followed. It was paint, basically. So Gary Ridgway was a painter for 30 years. There was paint on at least 8 victims' clothing and evidence that was collected at the crime scene. Quote, the tiny spheres of a unique industrial spray paint linking Ridgway to their murders could have been detected back in the 80s, possibly preventing at least some of his 49 confirmed killings. 49.
I mean, that's very disheartening.
Yeah, so I didn't want to go in too hard into the science of it, but basically it's like an infrared microscope, I believe they called it, and that microscope, if you put a piece of the evidence under the microscope, even in 1980, it would have shown these paint scrapings. They would have still needed specialty services to come in to match that paint to something.
But was it possible to do so?
Yes. There was a story in the NBC News article about a scientist who had visited this crime lab and had given a presentation in 85 and said, I've noticed that you've had a lot of these murders in the area lately. If you get a suspect, let me know. So he kind of wonders because he eventually finds the results when his lab is hired to run tests after Gary Ridgway is linked by DNA. But then he realizes that this could have been found as early as, when his first victims were being found, excuse me.
I wonder if that's just a lack of I wonder why they didn't bring him in earlier.
Well, they brought him in plenty of times. He just was always able to weasel his way out.
No, the paint guy.
Oh, yeah. Just, I guess it was maybe an oversight, or you sometimes hear stories about police forces being really protective of their cases. So, could I'm not saying that happened, but I don't know if that plays a part in it.
Yeah.
The NBC News says, as some kind of way to explain this, the crime lab had like I said, there were at least 49 murders that are linked to him that he's going to end up serving time for. There's so much evidence. There were staffing constraints, other cases, obviously. The crime lab had to choose what evidence to focus on, and they chose to analyze like hairs and fibers, I guess, rather than looking microscopically at the smaller stuff. So it sucks that technology did exist. It's just kind of another thing to add to the list of sad and confusing facts about this case, that they knew that he was a suspect from the beginning, and he was just killing the whole time that he was a suspect. And he was killing people in a vulnerable population that he targeted specifically for that reason, because he didn't think that their deaths would be investigated.
And it was a sexual-based crime.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, long story short, with the paint, it's spray paint, and it's found on 8 victims' clothing. It's not publicly sold. It's only used in the Seattle area in the early 80s by Kenworth Truck Company, where Gary Ridgway works. So he would pick up victims after work and have paint on them, and it would transfer.
Seems very cut and dry.
Yeah. Again, I'm not in law enforcement. I don't know what it's like to be a detective or a police officer. But you see all of these things lined up from a place of being in the future.
Yeah, and an outside perspective.
The
optics are not great.
It looks bad. It looks bad.
Yeah.
According to NBC News, some longtime investigators have been interviewed, and they've said that they didn't know about the paint flecks, obviously, and they thought it was a missed opportunity to catch him. So, like, but you know, you can't go looking for what you don't know about, but like, they did have this technology available.
And that guy gave that talk.
Yeah, that was 85, but yeah. So, you know,
that's still a hell of a lot earlier than 2001.
Yeah, that's what's kind of hard. So this paint evidence mixed with the DNA evidence puts enough pressure on Gary Ridgway into making a deal with prosecutors. He cooperates fully, confesses to a ton of murders that they didn't even know about, shows them where bodies are, and is spared the death penalty. And he is still alive, serving his sentence in Walla Walla, Washington.
I've been to Walla Walla.
Yeah. Just interestingly, without that deal, it is likely that like more than 40 of his murders would have been unsolved. So this ultimately was a good deal and provided some closure for those families, hopefully.
Yeah, I would always rather that we get those, you know, that we get that information for the families. And
of course.
Are we a death penalty state?
No, I don't think so.
Oh.
Look it up. I don't know. I don't think so.
Because he just killed people. Because he just killed people in Washington, right?
Maybe. He kind of went all up and down I-5, I think, in like Washington. Oregon does not have the death penalty.
We did have the death penalty from 1904 to 2010.
Yeah, it looks like Oregon was till 2020.
Yeah. Our guy, Jay Inslee, you know him.
Oh, yeah.
He abolished capital punishment in Washington state in 2023.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway, fun little diversion there.
Okay, yeah.
So he could have been given the death penalty at the time.
Yeah, he could have. Speaking of breaking news, December 19th, 2023, the King County Sheriff's Office announces that it has identified 15-year-old Lori Ann Razpotnik, who ran away from home in Lewis County in 1982 and was never seen again, and has been definitively linked to the Green River killings. So that they're still, even if you go on to the like King County page about the Green River Killer, they have pictures of victims, like missing pictures of missing women that they think are linked to Gary Ridgway, and they're like, if you know anything, call us. So they are still looking for bodies that Gary Ridgway may have buried in Washington and possibly Oregon. Who knows?
That
So
is
yeah.
that's so brutal because, I mean, I don't need to say why it's brutal. You feel why it's brutal.
It's just awful. 15. Yeah. All right. I wrote, who is this asshole?
Yeah, who is this fuck?
So talked about Gary Ridgway being the Green River Killer. Yeah, that's the story. Here's who this guy fucking is. I don't like to glorify these guys, so I'm going to do this quickly and with very little empathy because he doesn't deserve it.
Agreed.
So he grew up in what would now be called SeaTac. His father was either a bus driver or a mortician, depending on what source you look at.
Two very different jobs.
Crime Junkie said he was a mortician, the dad, who like casually talked about necrophilia, which fits into the narrative very well.
Yes.
But then another source said he was a bus driver, so I'm not sure.
Well, maybe he was a two-job kind of man.
Yeah. Ridgway alleged later on that his mother was inappropriate with him. Apparently, he was a bedwetter until his mid-teens, and she would humiliate him in front of his family and possibly, like, wash him herself in the bathtub. Yeah.
No.
Scrub the sins away, that kind of thing. Just bad.
God.
According to Crime Junkie, he also set fires and harmed small animals, which is part of the triad of sociopathy.
Yes.
There's a story in the mid-60s about him just taking a young boy into the woods and stabbing him and just saying, I wanted to know what it would feel like to stab someone. The kid lived, but
thank God.
Would you ever be the same again after that?
No. Never.
Yeah. So Ridgway graduated from high school in 1969. He was held back a couple of times, so that was when he was 20. He immediately went into the U.S. Navy for a couple of years and then settled in the Seattle area where, as I said before, he worked as a painter. He painted trucks, I guess. He was married 3 times and had 1 son.
Interesting.
So there was a story that they told on Crime Junkie about him being, when he was overseas, when he was in the Navy, he was with a sex worker who gave him a STI, and that really upset him and so people point to that event and then point to some of the inappropriate behavior that he tells us that his mother exhibited, and possibly those things together combined to form his hatred of women. But there's no excuse for it, obviously. I'm just like pointing out some things that
I'm making a
you
lot
can kind of point
faces
to
about
that,
this.
That you can point to and be like, I like psychologically, I think I see a correlation, but who knows?
I mean, the mother stuff is understandable, but many people get STIs. You got to get over it.
It
happens, but
yeah. So that is pointed to as a reason why he possibly targeted sex workers. He also thought that their deaths wouldn't be investigated as heavily as other cases, and unfortunately, he might have been right. It took 20 years to catch him.
Yes.
It's hard to know.
I mean, I guess someone could go ask him.
No, I'm not going to.
No.
The last thing I'm going to say about this motherfucker. In 2013, he claimed in an interview that he thought that his number of murders was between 75 to 80 women. He was put away for 48.
I mean... So,
is that true? We don't know.
Who knows?
But, yeah, this guy's a sack of shit. And I hope that he is having a very fucking terrible time in Walla Walla, Washington. I hope he doesn't get any apples, any wine. What else are they doing up in Walla Walla?
Walla Walla is a beautiful countryside, and I hope he sees none of it.
I hope he is in fucking solitary confinement for the rest of his goddamn miserable life.
Did they just give him, he never went to trial, right? So,
they struck a deal so that he would cooperate and would not be executed.
Yeah. But he's in for life. Like,
Yeah. No, there's no way he's getting out.
okay. Well, I don't know. Sometimes you get some real bullshit sentences.
No, he pled guilty to 48 murders, so he's in there. He's in there.
It's in there for life. Thank
Yeah.
God.
But, yeah, thank God.
One of the most terrifying people I think I've ever heard of.
They finally caught him in 2001. Depraved, scary.
Like, I'm running through the list of people that we've talked about of true crime that I've listened to. That's up there. That's like,
Yeah.
it's hard to call that kind of person human. Like,
It is, yeah. He's a monster. I know this was a lot, this case. I wondered if some of our listeners were like me, where you've heard the name before and you might know some of the details, but just, I didn't realize the level of depravity, and I didn't realize how long he was on police's radar and how frustrating that would be for me. Again, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt in general, but he was committing these crimes for 20 years, and that just doesn't sit right with me.
no. And I mean, I feel like it's so hard, and we've discussed this before. Like, you want someone like this, and you want the system to take down someone like this. Like, you want the system to work fast and effective and just, like, take this person down. But, like, if, you know, they had the technology, but they didn't know where to look. They didn't have the evidence they needed to get him when they did. They didn't see all the pieces where it needed to be. And, like, you know, that's the system's in place so that people don't get wrongly convicted or wrongly accused. But that leads to these protracted, sometimes you get these protracted investigations where you're looking at one guy for so long and you're like, where can I be able to point the finger and say it's this fucking dude?
Yeah. Yeah. So that is, the very frustrating Green River Killer case. Don't come for me, law enforcement.
Well, it's interesting that, like, last week we talked about police incompetence that felt like it had malice to it, you know?
Your story feels like there's a lot more malice behind it.
Indifference.
I mean, not that there needs to be a comparison, but like...
But we talked... I'm just bringing it back up only because Katelyn and I are recording these episodes on the same night.
Yeah,
so we're talking about this stuff back to back.
Fresh.
Yeah. You know, there's not really a comparison between these two cases, but I thought it was interesting that we both had frustrating policing in mind.
Yeah. On the same wavelength, I guess.
Yeah. It is chilling, and it's chilling that this is a killer that people tend to idolize, like, which
he's up there with Ted Bundy, and yeah, it's gross. Don't idolize serial killers or murderers. It's not good.
I recently learned the name, more sciencey name for people who really who are attracted to people who commit crimes.
What is it?
Hybristophiliacs.
Oh, that's a wild one.
Right?
Yeah, that's a hybristophiliacs.
Yeah.
It does roll off the tongue, kind of.
It does. But I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, I was not familiar with this story so much as I knew where the murders took place, you know.
Yeah, obviously, of course,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. Being someone from not from the Pacific Northwest, but living in the Pacific Northwest with a true crime podcast.
Yeah, you know about it, but yeah, it's a lot more than I thought I was getting into.
Well, you know, I think the particulars are important. It's, you know, if you're gonna talk about these kinds of killers, you have to say what was around, you know, all the crimes.
Well, and I can only hope that this was, you know, that this was like a learning experience for the people. I hope like that this made them better police. I don't know what I'm even fucking saying anymore, but like I hope that steps were taken so that things like this didn't happen again. I don't know of a lot of serial killers that were able to go on for 20 years.
Yeah, that's pretty grim.
Yeah. So I hope that if there's any positive to take out of it, I hope that maybe, I don't know. I got nothing. There's not really a positive in all this.
I mean, you were saying that even to this day, some of his victims are getting their identities back.
Yeah.
And that, you know, maybe people who are wondering what had happened to them now know. And
yeah, there's some closure.
Yeah.
And I hope that for the families of the victims in our last week's story, that they can get closure too, like a lot of these people's families.
I think so much of the pain is the uncertainty and the not knowing and all the things that it could be. And even if it's the worst thing, at least you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Boneheads, please take care of yourselves. This was a couple of rough stories. We'll come back with something lighter next week. And we love you. Stay safe out there. And as always,
Bon voyage. Wait a second. Modern birds are a kind of dinosaur because they share a common ancestor with non-avian dinosaurs.
Oh, got him. Got that dino fact in.
Got that dino fact in.
Second
All
week
right.
in a row. You did it.
I did it. Cut the recording.
Thanks for listening to Anything Bones. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Anything Bones Podcast, or email us at anythingbonespodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you to Nick Kruger for our spooky music and Stephen Vetteroff
At Chubby Scrubby on Twitter,
for our jazzy vocals, and thank you to Camilla Franklin
at Camilla Strader on Instagram.
for our beautiful bony artwork. Please rate, review, and subscribe.
Hey, Freaky Friends! It's Michelle and Melissa from the Freaky Fridays podcast. We are sisters in separate states and love to talk about all kinds of spooky, freaky, and scary shit while drinking and laughing through our fear.
Join us Fridays as we delve into everything from the world of the paranormal to scary movies to creepy stuff we find around the internet. Subscribe to Freaky Fridays wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Sleep tight.
Make sure you leave the lights on.
Freaky Fridays is a proud member of the Podmoth Network. For more awesome pods, check out podmoth.network.
One big chunk.
One big chunk.